The courtroom was silent, not the kind of silence that came from respect, but the kind that stretched tight, filled with unspoken skepticism. The air inside was crisp, the fluorescent lights above humming faintly, casting a pale glow over the polished wooden benches in the stern face of the judge seated high on his podium. Emma Carter stood at the plaintiff's table, her fingers lightly resting on a stack of documents. Across from her, a row of well-dressed attorneys representing Brightstone Realty sat with effortless confidence, their sleek leather briefcases neatly lined up beside them. The lead attorney, a sharp-jawed man in a three-piece suit, was mid-sentence, his voice smooth and unwavering. "Your Honor," he said, adjusting his glasses with a deliberate slowness, "this case is nothing more than a misguided attempt by a young woman who simply did not read the contract she signed. The terms were clear. She agreed, she paid, and now she regrets it. That does not constitute fraud. It is, at best, a misunderstanding." A murmur ran through the gallery, a few chuckles, some quiet nods. Emma caught a glimpse of one of the paralegals from Brightstone suppressing a smirk. From the bench, Judge Alan Marston, a man in his 60s with deep lines etched into his forehead, regarded her with mild amusement. He tapped his gavel once, leaning forward. "Miss Carter," he began, his tone bordering on condescending, "are you seriously trying to outsmart a multi-million-dollar real estate company? You're 20. You barely understand how rent works, let alone rental laws." The words hit like a slap, not because they were unexpected, but because they echoed exactly what Emma had been told time and time again. Too young, too naive, out of her depth. A ripple of quiet laughter spread across the courtroom. Some spectators exchanged knowing looks, as if they'd already predicted the outcome. The attorneys from Brightstone remained composed, but their eyes gleamed with the quiet confidence of professionals who had won too many cases like this to be worried. Emma swallowed. Her pulse was steady, but there was a weight in her chest. She knew how this looked. A 20-year-old woman standing alone against a corporate giant. A case that should have been dismissed before it even began. But that wasn't going to happen. She lifted her chin slightly, exhaling through her nose. Her fingers brushed the edge of her file, feeling the thickness of the papers inside. Contracts, emails, proof. Slowly, deliberately, she met the judge's gaze. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, her voice even, unwavering, "let me show you why they are wrong." The room didn't erupt into gasps or protests. This wasn't a television drama, but the shift in energy was real. The amusement in the judge's eyes flickered. The attorneys exchanged quick glances. Someone in the gallery leaned forward. Emma saw it. That small, almost imperceptible shift. Doubt. She tightened her grip on the edge of the table. This was where her fight truly began. "Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you." Emma Carter had always prided herself on being practical. She wasn't someone who jumped into things blindly, and she certainly wasn't the kind of person to fall for a scam. But standing in the middle of a busy New York street, staring at the text message that had just flashed across her phone screen, she felt her stomach twist. Transaction completed. $3,500 deducted. She exhaled, shaking off the strange unease creeping up her spine. This was supposed to be a good thing, a step toward independence. Finding a decent apartment in the city on an entry-level salary was nearly impossible, and after weeks of scrolling through overpriced listings, she had finally come across Brightstone Realty. Their advertisement had seemed almost too good to be true. A modern studio, just a short subway ride from her office, at a price that didn't make her feel like she was selling her soul. The leasing agent, Mark Holloway, had been friendly, professional, so convincing that Emma had felt relieved rather than suspicious. "The contract is standard," he had reassured her, sliding the neatly printed papers across the desk. "Nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual clauses about security deposits and lease terms." She had skimmed the pages, the legal jargon swirling together, but nothing had stood out as a red flag. She wasn't a lawyer, but it all seemed legitimate enough, and she didn't want to hesitate too long. New York apartments never stayed on the market for more than a few days. Now, with the deposit sent, all she had to do was show up in 2 days to pick up the keys. She forced a smile, slipping her phone into her bag. Everything was going to be fine. 2 days later, Emma stood in front of the apartment building, gripping her suitcase handle. The building was older than she'd expected, with chipped paint along the edges of the doorway, but she reminded herself that New York real estate was never perfect. She had been promised a clean, newly renovated unit on the fourth floor. She stepped inside, scanning the lobby for Mark. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Her fingers hovered over her phone before she finally pressed call. It rang twice before going straight to voicemail. A flicker of doubt crawled into her mind. She tried again. Same result. Her throat tightened. Emma took a slow breath, trying to stay rational. Maybe Mark was running late. Maybe she had gotten the time wrong. But as she stood there shifting on her feet, a woman walked past her, pulling open the lobby door with a key card and stepping inside as if she had lived there for years. Emma caught the door before it closed. "Excuse me," she called after the woman. "I'm supposed to be moving in today, Unit 4B. Do you happen to know if the previous tenant already moved out?" The woman frowned. "4B?" Emma nodded. "That apartment isn't vacant," the woman said. "I just saw the guy who lives there this morning." Something inside Emma cracked. "That's not possible," she said, but the words felt weak even as she spoke them. The woman gave her a look of sympathy. "You should talk to the management office. If you signed a lease, they should have your information." Emma felt her pulse in her ears as she forced out a thank you and stumbled back onto the sidewalk. The street noise blurred into the background as she scrolled through her emails, pulling up the contract Mark had sent her. Her stomach dropped. There was no unit number listed on the lease. She felt the blood drain from her face. This was a mistake. It had to be. She pressed Mark's number again, and this time, it didn't even ring. The call failed immediately. Panic surged through her. Something was very, very wrong. By the time Emma arrived at Brightstone Realty's office, her legs felt numb from walking so fast. The sleek glass doors reflected the late afternoon sunlight, and for a moment, she clung to the hope that this was just some mix-up. Inside, the receptionist barely looked up from her computer when Emma approached. "Hi, I need to speak with Mark Holloway," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was supposed to move into my apartment today, but—" The receptionist barely glanced at her. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but we don't take walk-ins for lease issues. You can send an email and someone will get back to you." Emma felt like she'd been slapped. "No, She exhaled sharply. "Listen, I sent a deposit for an apartment. I was given a move-in date. I just need someone to explain." The receptionist tapped something on her keyboard, then looked up at her. "You signed the lease?" "Yes." "Then we can't help you." The finality in her tone sent a fresh wave of dread through Emma. "What do you mean?" she asked, voice thin. "I don't even have a unit." The receptionist gave her a tight, practiced smile. "You should have read the contract carefully. Have a good day." The world tilted for a second. Emma opened her mouth, but the woman had already turned back to her screen, dismissing her entirely. Her limbs felt heavy as she backed away, stepping out onto the busy sidewalk. The rush of people moving past her felt surreal, like she was standing still in a city that refused to stop. This couldn't be happening. She had just lost every penny she had saved. That night, Emma sat on the floor of her old apartment, staring at her laptop. The screen glowed in the dimly lit room, illuminating the deep frown on her face. Megan Torres, her best friend and roommate, leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "This doesn't sound like a mistake," Megan said, her expression unreadable. "It sounds like a scam." Emma rubbed her eyes. "I don't know. Maybe I missed something in the contract." Megan scoffed. "That's exactly what they want you to think." Emma hesitated, then typed Brightstone Realty scam into the search bar. Dozens of results flooded the screen. Customer complaints, lawsuits, victims sharing stories identical to hers. Her chest tightened. Her hands curled into fists as she scrolled through the countless testimonies. Stories of stolen deposits, unfulfilled lease agreements, tenants being ignored until they gave up trying to fight. It was all there. This wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. Emma clenched her jaw. "If they think they can silence me like the others," she said, her voice low and sharp, "they have no idea who they're dealing with." Emma sat on the edge of her bed, her laptop screen glowing in the dim light of her apartment. The email she had drafted to Brightstone Realty was short and to the point. directly stating the issue and demanding either her keys or a full refund. Her finger hovered over the send button for a moment before she clicked it. She checked her phone. No response. An hour passed, then two. She tried calling again. The line rang once before going straight to voicemail. Her stomach churned. She called again. Blocked. A sharp sting of frustration crawled up her spine. This wasn't just incompetence. This was deliberate. She pulled up the company's website and found their general office number. A different receptionist answered this time, her voice clipped and uninterested. I'm calling about my lease agreement. I paid my deposit, but I haven't been given access to my unit. A pause. Then in the same robotic tone, the woman responded, all inquiries need to be sent via email. I already sent an email, Emma pressed, trying to keep her voice level. No one has gotten back to me. If you send an email, someone will respond within the standard processing time. And what is the standard processing time? Another pause. 7 to 10 business days. Emma let out a breath, gripping her phone tighter. I don't have 7 to 10 business days. I was supposed to move in today. You have my money. I'm sorry, ma'am, but if you've already signed your lease, there's nothing more we can do. Emma nearly laughed at the sheer absurdity of it. What do you mean there's nothing you can do? You didn't even give me a unit number. The line clicked off. She stared at her phone in disbelief before pressing redial. The call wouldn't go through. They had blocked her again. Her blood boiled. This wasn't some bureaucratic mistake. This was a scam, well-oiled and precise, designed to silence anyone who dared to fight back. Emma wasn't going to be one of them. The next morning, she stormed into Brightstone Realty's office. The lobby smelled like fresh paint and manufactured wealth. Sleek, modern decor meant to project legitimacy. A security guard stood near the entrance, his expression blank but his posture stiff. Emma walked straight to the reception desk. The same woman from yesterday barely glanced up. I need to speak with someone about my lease, Emma said, her voice controlled but firm. The receptionist typed something into her computer before looking up with that same rehearsed indifference. Your case has been reviewed. There's nothing more we can do. You haven't reviewed anything. I haven't even spoken to anyone. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Emma's fingers curled into fists at her sides. No, I'm not leaving until... A shadow loomed over her. The security guard. I think it's best if you go now, he said, voice low and unwavering. Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to demand answers. But the weight of his presence made it clear. This was planned. They knew people would show up. They were prepared. The realization made her sick. Brightstone Realty had done this before, and they had done it so many times they already had a script for shutting people down. She clenched her jaw and turned on her heel, pushing through the glass doors and stepping back into the New York air, thick with the scent of exhaust and concrete. They thought they could silence her. They were wrong. That night, Megan sat across from Emma at their tiny kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. Okay, so your options are pretty limited, she said, pushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. You could file a police report, but honestly, they're not going to do much. Civil court takes forever, and hiring a lawyer is probably expensive as hell. Emma exhaled. She had known that already, but hearing it out loud made it feel heavier. I don't need a lawyer, she muttered. I just need someone who knows how to fight these people. Megan hummed in thought, then tapped on her phone a few times before turning the screen toward Emma. This guy. Emma took the phone. The article was an interview with Daniel Reed, a tenant rights attorney who had built a reputation for taking on fraudulent landlords and winning. She skimmed the article. Multiple cases against major rental companies. Settlements in the millions. Fought against corporate intimidation tactics. Her pulse quickened. She found his email at the bottom of the page and immediately drafted a message, detailing everything that had happened. She hesitated before pressing send. Would someone like him even care about a case this small? Probably not, but at this point she had nothing to lose. The response came 20 minutes later. Emma blinked at her screen, half expecting it to be an automated reply. But no, it was from Daniel himself. He had written a short message. Your case is interesting. Let's talk tomorrow. My office. 10 a.m. She read it twice, barely processing the words. Megan let out a low whistle. Well, damn, that was fast. Emma stared at the screen, her mind racing. For the first time since this nightmare started, she felt something other than fear. She felt momentum. Daniel Reed's office wasn't in some high-rise building with a marble lobby. It was in a modest space above a coffee shop in Brooklyn, tucked between a bakery and a used bookstore. The kind of place where the walls were lined with case files instead of abstract art, and the smell of burnt coffee and printer ink hung in the air. When she walked in, Daniel was already flipping through the copy of her lease she had sent him. He didn't look how she expected. No stiff suit, no expensive watch. Just a man in his early 30s, dressed in a button-down and rolled-up sleeves, his dark hair slightly unkempt, his sharp eyes flicked up to meet hers. "You've been scammed," he said without preamble. Emma let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, I got that part." He leaned back in his chair. "I've seen this before. They prey on young renters who don't have the resources to fight back. By the time people realize they've been conned, they've already moved on, too exhausted to take legal action." Emma folded her arms. "I'm not moving on." That seemed to amuse him. "Good," he said, "because this is going to get ugly." She hesitated. "What do you mean?" Daniel sat forward, placing the lease on the desk between them. "Brightstone doesn't fight fair. They'll ignore you, discredit you, maybe even threaten you. They have money, lawyers, and experience. You have none of those things." Emma met his gaze. "But I have you." Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That you do." He slid a pen across the table. "You need to be ready. This is going to be a war, and they don't play fair." Emma took the pen. The weight of it in her hand felt different than when she had signed the Brightstone lease. This time she wasn't signing away her future. She was taking it back. As she left the office, stepping onto the bustling sidewalk, she felt the shift. The fight had officially begun, and she wasn't backing down. If they want a war, they'll get one. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her, the screen casting a faint glow on her tired face. Megan stood behind her, arms crossed, peering at the screen over her shoulder. Brightstone Realty's website was sleek and professional, exactly the kind of polished front that made them look legitimate. But as Emma scrolled through the pages, something felt off. There were no names listed anywhere. No CEO, no management team, not even a contact person beyond the generic customer service email. "That's weird," Megan muttered. "Even shady companies at least pretend to have a leadership team." Emma clicked through the tabs, searching for anything useful. "They make sure no one can tie this back to a single person," she said, shaking her head. "That way, when people complain, there's no one to hold accountable." Megan exhaled through her nose. "Well, let's see if anyone's been complaining." They switched to online reviews. There were dozens, hundreds even, but most of them were suspiciously positive, generic 5-star ratings that sounded like they had been written by bots. The real ones, the 1-star reviews filled with angry warnings, were buried beneath them, nearly impossible to find unless you dug deep. Emma clicked on a review from a woman named Lisa C. "Scam! They took my deposit and gave me nothing in return. Do not trust this company." Another one, from James R. "Avoid Brightstone Realty at all costs. They make promises they don't keep, then disappear when you try to get your money back." Megan frowned. "It's like they wipe out the bad ones and replace them with fake ones." Emma nodded, her fingers moving quickly as she copied links and saved screenshots. They control the narrative. Anyone looking them up wouldn't see the warnings unless they knew where to look. As they scrolled further, something caught Emma's eye. A blog post from 3 years ago. "The woman who tried to fight back." She clicked on it. It led to an error page. "Damn it," Emma muttered. Megan leaned closer. "Wait, check the cached version." Emma quickly pulled up the Google cache version of the page. It loaded slowly, but when the words finally appeared on the screen, Emma's breath caught. Evelyn Monroe, 65, lost $15,000 to Brightstone Realty in 2021. The article detailed how Evelyn had signed a lease, paid her deposit, and, just like Emma, never received the keys to her apartment. She had filed a lawsuit, but Brightstone's lawyers had torn her case apart in court, claiming she had misunderstood the lease agreement. With no solid proof, the case had been dismissed. But there was more. The article claimed that after the lawsuit failed, Evelyn had received a letter from Brightstone's legal team, warning her to keep quiet. They threatened her, Emma whispered. Megan's expression hardened. We need to talk to her. Emma was already pulling out her phone. Evelyn Monroe lived in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Brooklyn, in a small, well-kept house with a weathered front porch. Emma and Megan climbed the steps and rang the doorbell. It took a moment, but then the door opened. Evelyn was older, but her eyes were sharp, scanning them with wary suspicion. I don't buy anything from the door, she said flatly. Emma took a step forward. Ms. Monroe, my name is Emma Carter. I think we have something in common. Evelyn's brow furrowed. And what would that be? Brightstone Realty, Emma said. The woman stiffened. Emma continued. They stole my money, just like they did to you. I found the article about your case, but it's been deleted. I need to know what happened. Evelyn hesitated, then exhaled, stepping aside. Come in. Inside, the living room was modest but cozy, filled with framed photographs of a family that looked loving and full of life. Evelyn led them to a small wooden table in the kitchen and sat down, folding her hands in front of her. They took everything from me, she said quietly. $15,000. That was my life savings. Emma sat across from her, feeling the weight of every word. I tried to fight them, Evelyn continued. I did everything I could. Hired a lawyer, gathered evidence. But they were prepared. Their attorneys picked apart my case until there was nothing left. She looked up, her gaze hard. And then the letter came. She stood, crossed the room, and returned with a folder. Inside was a yellowed, creased envelope with the Brightstone Realty logo stamped at the top. She pulled out the letter and slid it toward Emma. Emma picked it up, scanning the words. Dear Ms. Monroe, we are aware of your ongoing accusations against Brightstone Realty. Continuing to spread false or defamatory statements about our company may result in legal action against you. We strongly advise you to cease all public complaints. At the bottom, 2 signatures stood out. Richard Calloway, CEO, Victoria Hale, legal counsel. Emma's jaw clenched. They bullied you into silence, she murmured. Evelyn let out a humorless laugh. They didn't need to. After they dragged me through court, I had nothing left, financially or emotionally. So I gave up. Emma looked down at the letter again. Not this time. Back at Daniel Reed's office, Emma placed the letter on his desk. He studied it for a long moment, then nodded. This might be our smoking gun, he said. Emma exhaled. So what do we do with it? Daniel tapped the paper. This letter is a violation of consumer protection laws. Companies can't threaten former tenants into silence, especially if there was actual fraud involved. This gives us leverage. Emma's fingers tightened around the edge of her chair. Then let's use it. Daniel hesitated. If we move forward with this, Brightstone will come after you hard. They'll fight like hell to keep this buried. Emma met his gaze without blinking. Then let's get ready for battle. Emma sat across from Daniel in his office, the weight of the letter from Brightstone Realty pressing against her fingertips. The evidence was there, clear as day. Brightstone had knowingly threatened a former tenant into silence. This wasn't just a dispute over a lease anymore. This was a battle for justice. Daniel leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the desk. This is how we start. A formal demand letter. We give them the chance to settle before we take it to court. Emma frowned. And if they refuse? Daniel smirked. Then we make them regret it. The next day, they sent the letter, a legally binding request for Brightstone to return Emma's deposit, acknowledge their misconduct, and compensate her for damages. The tone was firm, but left room for resolution. For 2 days, there was silence. Then an email arrived. Brightstone Realty legal team subject. Response to claim. Ms. Carter, after reviewing your complaint, we have determined that there is no legal basis for your claims. You entered into a valid lease agreement with Brightstone Realty and were provided all necessary documents. Your failure to follow through on the lease terms is not the fault of our company. We strongly urge you to reconsider any further legal action, as we are prepared to defend our reputation aggressively. Any attempt to publicly disparage Brightstone Realty may result in a counter-lawsuit for defamation. Sincerely, Victoria Hale, Esquire. Emma's blood ran cold. Daniel read over her shoulder, his expression unreadable. So that's their move. They're threatening me. They're trying to scare you, he corrected. Victoria Hale doesn't bluff, but she also doesn't waste time on cases she thinks are weak. That means she knows you have something. Emma tightened her grip on the phone. So what do we do? Daniel smiled. We keep going. That evening, Emma sat on the couch, scrolling through her emails while Megan paced the room. This is getting serious, Megan said, arms crossed. They're not just ignoring you anymore. They're fighting back, Emma sighed. I expected this. Megan stopped pacing. Did you? Because I don't think you understand how dangerous this could get. Emma looked up. They stole my money, Megan. I know that, Megan shot back. But these people have power, they have lawyers, they have resources, and they clearly don't care about playing fair. If you keep pushing, who knows what they'll do? Emma hesitated. She hadn't considered that. Not fully. She had been so focused on proving them wrong that she hadn't thought about what pushing back might cost her. Megan softened. Look, I support you, but I don't want to see you get hurt over this. Emma exhaled. I get it, but if I stop now, they win, and they'll keep doing this to other people. Megan sighed, then dropped onto the couch next to her. Fine, but we do this together. Emma smiled. Deal. The next morning, Daniel handed Emma a thick folder. More contracts from past tenants, he said. Some of these have the same loopholes as yours. Brightstone's been running this scam for years, but no one's had enough evidence to take them down. Emma flipped through the papers, her anger mounting. How do we prove it in court? Daniel tapped one of the contracts. We compare them, show a pattern, and we use Evelyn Monroe's case as a precedent. That letter they sent her, that's intimidation. It violates consumer protection laws. Emma nodded. So what's the next step? We file the lawsuit. She took a deep breath. This was it, the moment where there was no turning back. Do it, she said. That evening, Emma received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Ms. Carter, a smooth female voice greeted her. This is Victoria Hale. Emma's grip tightened around her phone. What do you want? To save you from making a mistake, Victoria said, her tone almost pleasant. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Why waste it on a case you won't win? Emma's jaw clenched. That's not your decision to make. Victoria chuckled. Let me be clear. If you proceed with this, we will come after you. Your reputation, your financial stability, everything. Think carefully about what you're risking. Emma's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. Are you done? A pause. Suit yourself. The line went dead. Emma stared at the phone. She should have been afraid. Maybe she was. But more than anything, she was furious. She met Daniel the next morning, telling him about the call. He wasn't surprised. She's trying to shake you. Don't let her. Emma exhaled. We knew this wouldn't be easy, but I'm not giving up now. Emma had expected resistance from Brightstone Realty. She had prepared herself for the legal battle, the long hours of collecting evidence, and even the underhanded tactics they might use in court. What she hadn't anticipated was how far they were willing to go. It started small. A few online comments on legal forums questioning her credibility, then subtle shifts in tone from acquaintances, hesitation in their voices when they talked to her, as if they had heard something about her but weren't sure whether to believe it. Then came the headlines. Tenant lawsuit backfires, young woman fabricates claims against real estate giant. Disgruntled renter attempts to scam landlord after buyer's remorse. Emma scrolled through the articles, each one painting her as an opportunist who had misunderstood the lease terms and was now trying to exploit a big company for financial gain. Some quoted anonymous sources who claimed to have worked with her and described her as unstable, impulsive, and manipulative. Her hands tightened around her phone as she read. This is... Megan stopped mid-sentence, staring at the screen over Emma's shoulder. This is next-level evil. They're setting the narrative, Emma murmured. Before we even get to court, they want to make sure no one believes me. Megan's jaw clenched. This isn't just damage control. This is character assassination. Emma closed her laptop and pressed her fingers against her temples. What if people believe them? Megan sat across from her. People who know you won't, and anyone worth their salt will see through this. Emma exhaled, but the weight in her chest didn't ease. At Daniel's office, he tossed a newspaper onto the desk in front of her. They're going full force. Emma glanced down. The Daily Ledger, a tabloid-style article with a photo of her from college, looking carefree and laughing at a party. The caption underneath read, "Emma Carter, irresponsible party girl or legal fraudster." She scoffed. "This is what they've got? That I went to college?" Daniel didn't smile. "This isn't about truth. It's about planting doubt. They're making you look unreliable so that by the time we get to court, the judge won't see you as a victim. Just another person looking for a payout." Emma leaned back, shaking her head. "And people wonder why victims don't come forward." Daniel watched her for a moment. "Are you okay?" "No," she admitted, "but that doesn't mean I'm quitting." Daniel nodded approvingly. "Then let's hit back." That evening, an official notice from the court arrived at Daniel's office. Brightstone Realty had requested a mediation hearing, an attempt to settle outside of court. On the surface, it seemed like an olive branch, a chance to resolve things without a drawn-out legal fight. But Daniel saw through it immediately. "This is a trap," he said. Emma frowned. "How?" "If we agree to mediation, it gives them a chance to control the conversation. They'll make an offer, probably a small payout, and pressure you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. That way, even if you win something, no one ever hears about what they did." Emma stared at the letter. "So they're trying to buy my silence." "Exactly," she folded her arms. "Then we don't accept." Daniel smirked. "I was hoping you'd say that." The next day, Daniel received an unexpected invitation, a private meeting request from Richard Callaway, CEO of Brightstone Realty. The meeting took place at an upscale Manhattan steakhouse, a place dripping in old money and quiet power. Callaway was already seated in a private booth when Daniel arrived, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of him. Callaway, in his mid-50s, had the kind of presence that filled a room even when he wasn't speaking. His salt-and-pepper hair was perfectly groomed, his tailored suit effortlessly expensive. Daniel slid into the seat across from him. "I assume this isn't just a friendly dinner." Callaway chuckled. "It's business, Mr. Reed. You know how this works." Daniel didn't respond. The CEO swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "You and your client are making a lot of noise. That's not good for anyone." Daniel leaned back. "Not good for you, you mean?" Callaway smirked. "Let's not play games. We both know this case is a long shot. Emma Carter is young, inexperienced, and, let's be honest, doesn't have the resources to fight this battle." "I do," Daniel said nothing, letting the man continue. Callaway set down his glass. "Here's my offer. You and your client walk away from this case, and I make it worth your while." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And what does that mean?" Callaway slid an envelope across the table. Daniel didn't touch it. "If you think I'm the kind of lawyer who takes bribes, you didn't do your homework." Callaway chuckled again. "That's not a bribe, Mr. Reed. That's a settlement offer. Off the record, of course. A generous one. Enough to make sure you and Miss Carter never have to worry about cases like this again." Daniel's jaw tightened. Callaway's smile faded slightly. "You don't have to say yes right away, but think about it. You're a smart man. You know what happens if this goes to trial. We drag it out, bleed her financially, attack her credibility until there's nothing left. And in the end, even if she wins, she loses." He picked up his glass again, taking a slow sip. "So why go through all that when we can all walk away happy?" Daniel stared at him, then stood. "I'll pass the message along." Callaway nodded, unbothered. "You do that." Back at Daniel's office, Emma listened to his recounting of the meeting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she didn't hesitate. "We're not taking it." Daniel studied her carefully. "Are you sure? It was a lot of money." Emma met his gaze. "Money doesn't change the truth. We're going to win this, or we'll make sure no one ever forgets what they did." Daniel smiled. "Then let's get to work." The fight had just gotten dirtier, but Emma wasn't backing down. Emma woke up to a flood of notifications. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, lighting up her darkened room like a strobe light. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and unlocked the screen. Her heart sank. Everywhere, Facebook, Twitter, news sites. Her name was plastered across headlines. Renter's lawsuit falls apart as evidence of fraud surfaces. Young woman caught exploiting legal loopholes to shake down real estate firm. Sources say Emma Carter has a history of financial mismanagement. She scrolled through, each article more damning than the last. They had twisted the story completely. Brightstone Realty wasn't the villain anymore. She was. A sharp knock on her door startled her. Megan stood there, arms crossed, her face tight with concern. "Have you seen the news?" Megan asked, stepping inside. Emma exhaled. "Yeah." Megan hesitated. "It's bad, Emma. My coworkers are talking about it. Even my mom asked me if you're actually in legal trouble." Emma clenched her jaw. "They're trying to make me look like the liar." Megan sat down across from her. "It's working." Emma's chest tightened. She could fight a lawsuit. She could handle a legal battle. But public opinion? That was something else entirely. At Daniel's office, he tossed a folder onto the table. Inside were printouts of articles, screenshots of posts, and manipulated images of Emma looking untrustworthy. Photos taken out of context. Headlines designed to make her appear greedy and reckless. "They're trying to make you the villain," Daniel said, rubbing his temple. "If they succeed, no one will believe you." Emma stared at the pages. "So what do we do?" "We fight back." "How?" Daniel leaned forward. "First, we don't react emotionally. That's what they want. We stick to facts. We double down on the lawsuit. And second, we need something bigger. Something that proves Brightstone is behind all of this." Emma nodded, but her stomach twisted. The weight of the pressure, the attacks, the isolation, it was suffocating. That night, she got a call from her father. "Emma," he said, his voice strained, "are you sure about this lawsuit?" She gripped her phone. "Dad, they stole my money. They've done this to hundreds of people." "I know," he sighed, "but these kinds of companies, they don't lose. They make people disappear, legally speaking." Emma's throat tightened. "So what? I just let them win?" A pause. "I just don't want to see you get hurt," he said quietly. Emma swallowed hard. "I know, but I can't walk away." When the call ended, she sat in the silence, feeling the weight of her father's concern, of Megan's hesitation, of the entire world seemingly against her. And for the first time, she wondered, was this fight really worth it? The next afternoon, a new email popped up in her inbox. Subject, "I have proof. Meet me." Emma's pulse spiked. The sender was anonymous, but the message was simple. "I used to work for them. I know what they did. If you want the truth, meet me." Daniel scanned the email, his expression unreadable. "It could be real," Emma said. "It could be the break we need." Daniel exhaled. "Or it could be a trap." Emma hesitated. He wasn't wrong. If Brightstone was willing to launch a full-scale smear campaign against her, what was stopping them from setting up something worse? Daniel leaned back. "I'll go with you." They met Ryan Sterling at a diner on the Lower East Side. He was in his early 40s with tired eyes and a nervous twitch in his fingers as he stirred his coffee. "I don't have much time," he said. "If they find out I'm talking to you—" Emma and Daniel exchanged a look. Ryan exhaled. "I worked in Brightstone's legal compliance department. I saw everything. The fake contracts, the altered documents, the legal loopholes they used to keep scamming people without getting caught." Daniel folded his arms. "And why are you coming forward now?" Ryan let out a dry laugh. "Because they fired me when I grew a conscience." He slid a USB drive across the table. Emma hesitated before taking it. "What's on this?" "Emails, internal documents, proof that Brightstone Realty intentionally modified lease agreements after tenants signed them to steal their deposits." Daniel's eyebrows shot up. "They changed contracts after signing?" Ryan nodded. "And I can prove it." Emma's breath caught. This wasn't just shady business practices. This was criminal fraud. Back at Daniel's office, they plugged in the USB and scanned through the files. There it was, a contract from 2022, modified post-signing to insert a non-refundable clause. The original signature date was unaltered, making it appear as if the tenant had agreed to terms they never actually saw. Emma's heart pounded. This changes everything. Daniel's lips curled into a slow smile. We're not just fighting for you anymore. We're fighting for everyone they've scammed. Emma sat in Daniel's office, her laptop open in front of her, the screen filled with drafts of emails and press contacts. Megan paced the room, arms crossed, her anxiety barely contained. They had the evidence. Now they needed the world to see it. Daniel leaned against his desk, tapping a pen against his palm. We need a journalist who knows how to handle corporate fraud, someone who won't be intimidated. Emma scrolled through her notes. Lisa Montgomery. Megan stopped pacing. The investigative reporter? Emma nodded. She's exposed real estate scams before. She wrote that piece last year on the luxury condo fraud in Manhattan. Daniel grabbed his phone. I know someone who can get us in touch. An hour later, they had a call scheduled. Lisa Montgomery was a no-nonsense journalist with a reputation for not backing down from corporate corruption. When she joined this video call, her short blonde hair was pulled into a ponytail, and her sharp blue eyes studied Emma through the screen. I've read the lawsuit, she said, voice crisp. It's solid, but lawsuits alone don't make headlines. What makes your story different? Emma took a deep breath. We have proof that Brightstone altered contracts after tenants signed them. We have internal emails, a former employee willing to testify, and a pattern of fraud that spans years. Lisa's gaze sharpened. Show me. Emma sent over the documents. Lisa's face remained impassive as she scanned through them, but after a few minutes, she let out a slow exhale. This is big, she murmured. Then she looked up. But if we run this, Brightstone will come after you harder than ever. They'll attack your credibility. They'll try to destroy you. Emma's fingers curled into fists. They already are. Lisa studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, give me 24 hours. If I'm doing this, I'm doing it right. The next morning, the article broke the internet. Exposed. Real estate giant Brightstone Realty altered contracts to steal deposits from tenants. People flooded social media with their own experiences. Stories of lost deposits, fraudulent leases, and ignored complaints poured in. Former Brightstone tenants rallied behind Emma, their voices finally heard. By noon, news stations picked up the story. Brightstone Realty was in crisis mode. That evening, CEO Richard Callaway appeared on a primetime news segment, flanked by his legal team. Let me be clear, Callaway said, his expression controlled, his voice smooth. Brightstone Realty operates with full transparency. We have never engaged in fraudulent activity. The interviewer raised an eyebrow. Then how do you explain the emails and altered contracts? Callaway smiled thinly. A misunderstanding, a disgruntled former employee with an agenda, and a young woman who may have misinterpreted her contract. Emma watched from her apartment, her fists clenched. Megan sat beside her, tense. He's making it sound like you're just confused. That's the strategy, Emma murmured. If they can't discredit the facts, they'll discredit me. But she wasn't going to let them win. The next day, Brightstone escalated. A doctored video surfaced online. In the footage, Emma was sitting in an office looking over a contract. The audio was altered to make it seem as though she said, I know the deposit is non-refundable. I just want to see if I can get something out of them. The clip exploded across the internet. Tenant caught admitting she knew the lease terms. New evidence suggests Emma Carter's lawsuit is a cash grab. Emma's phone blew up with messages. Some were from supporters, but others were cruel. You're a liar. You're trying to ruin a company for money. People like you make it harder for real victims. Her chest tightened as she scrolled. This was their final move. They were trying to turn everyone against her. Megan looked sick. Emma, what if people believe it? Emma's breath caught. You believe me, don't you? Megan hesitated. That hesitation cut deeper than anything else. Emma's voice dropped. Megan. Megan ran a hand through her hair. I don't know what's real anymore. Emma's stomach twisted. After everything, even her best friend was doubting her. Daniel called. His voice was sharp. They're trying to bury you alive. If we don't act fast, they might succeed. Emma closed her eyes, forcing herself to block out the noise, the fear, the doubt creeping into her own mind. Then she remembered the hundreds of people who had reached out, the lives Brightstone had ruined. She reopened her eyes, her voice steady. "I don't care what they throw at me," she said. "I'm not backing down." The courthouse was alive with tension. Reporters crowded outside, their cameras flashing as Emma stepped out of the car. She could hear the clicks of shutters, the murmurs of speculation, the voices of people who had already made up their minds about her. Some called out in support, others muttered doubts. Megan walked beside her, silent but present. Daniel led the way, his shoulders squared, his focus unshaken. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the back rows while former Brightstone tenants sat scattered among the audience, their faces a mix of hope and exhaustion. The weight of their expectations pressed down on Emma's shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. Victoria Hale stood with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "Your Honor," she began, her voice crisp, controlled. "This case is nothing more than a desperate attempt to gain attention and financial compensation from a reputable business." She turned, her gaze landing on Emma like a hawk spotting prey. The plaintiff, Emma Carter, willingly entered into a legal contract. She paid a deposit, acknowledged the terms, and now, months later, she claims she was deceived? Hale let out a soft scoff. "This is nothing but a calculated attack against my client." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Daniel remained still. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He was waiting. Hale pressed forward. "And let's not forget the evidence that clearly shows Miss Carter's intentions." She gestured toward the screen. The doctored video played. Emma's own voice filled the room, twisted, manipulated. "I know the deposit is non-refundable. I just want to see if I can get something out of them." The moment it ended, whispers filled the air. The judge's gaze hardened. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears. Daniel stood. "Objection, Your Honor. That video has been digitally altered." Hale smiled. "Is that so? Then I suppose Miss Carter never said those words?" Emma's fingers dug into her chair. Before Daniel could respond, Hale continued, her voice dripping with manufactured pity. "Miss Carter, let me ask you directly. Did you read your lease before you signed it?" Emma steadied herself. Hale cut her off. "Yes or no?" Emma swallowed. "I read it, but—" "Ah, so you did read it." Hale turned to the judge. "Then how exactly was she deceived?" Emma felt the pressure building. Hale was trying to push her into one simple mistake, one moment of hesitation, to cast doubt on everything she had said. Daniel's voice broke through. "Your Honor, if my client had truly understood the lease, why would Brightstone have needed to alter it after signing?" Silence. Hale's confidence flickered. Daniel moved toward the evidence table. "Let's talk about what Brightstone doesn't want us to see." The screen lit up with the real evidence. Email chains, time-stamped edits to lease agreements, proof that after tenants had signed, Brightstone had gone in and changed key terms, adding clauses that made refunds impossible, rewriting conditions that made disputes unwinnable. And at the bottom of one of those emails, Richard Calloway's signature. The room shifted. Hale's expression tightened. Daniel's voice was calm, measured. "This isn't about a misunderstanding. This isn't about a bad tenant trying to take advantage of a company." He turned to the jury. "This is about fraud. Fraud that has affected not just my client, but hundreds of people." Hale stood quickly. "Your Honor, we object to this new evidence being introduced." The judge held up a hand. "We will take a recess. This evidence requires further examination." The gavel slammed down. Hale turned toward Brightstone's legal team, whispering furiously. Emma exhaled. Brightstone was on the defensive. Outside the courtroom, Richard Calloway paced in a private meeting room, his jaw clenched. Victoria Hale entered, her expression unreadable. Calloway didn't look at her. "Tell me we're not losing this." Hale hesitated. Calloway turned, his eyes cold. "We're not losing this case," he said, voice low and dangerous. "Do whatever it takes." Emma stepped into her apartment, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. The weight of the trial, the media frenzy, and the relentless attacks from Brightstone had been crushing. But nothing prepared her for what she saw. Her living room had been ransacked, drawers yanked open, papers scattered across the floor. The couch cushions were slashed, stuffing spilling out like an open wound. The bookshelf was knocked over, its contents strewn haphazardly. Her stomach clenched. Megan, who had been following closely behind, let out a sharp breath. Emma, this isn't just a warning. Emma's eyes darted to the coffee table, where a single white envelope sat. It was the only thing placed deliberately, positioned neatly amid the chaos. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Inside was a single piece of paper. Drop the case, or you'll regret it. No signature, no indication of who sent it, but the message was crystal clear. Megan's face paled. We need to go to the police. Emma nodded numbly, her thoughts racing. The officers at the precinct took their statements, but as expected, there was little they could do. No cameras, no witnesses, no proof that tied the break-in directly to Brightstone. The responding officer, a gruff man in his 40s, sighed as he closed his notebook. Look, Miss Carter, I'm not saying you're wrong, but without evidence, all we can do is file a report. Emma gritted her teeth. So you're telling me that someone can break into my home, threaten me, and there's nothing you can do? The officer gave her a look of sympathy. Not unless they slip up. Emma exhaled sharply. Daniel was furious when he heard. This is it, he said, pacing his office. They've moved past legal tactics. They're trying to scare you into silence. Emma clenched her fists. It's working. Daniel stopped pacing. Then let's hit back harder. Before Emma could respond, the door opened, and Ryan Sterling stepped in. The former Brightstone employee looked tired, tense, but his eyes were steady as he met Emma's gaze. I heard what happened, Ryan said, and I can't stay quiet anymore. Emma straightened. You mean? I'll testify, Ryan said firmly. I'll tell the court everything I know. Daniel's brows lifted. You realize what that means, right? They'll come after you. Ryan exhaled. I know, but I also know that if we don't stop them now, they'll keep ruining lives. I won't let them get away with this. Emma felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. The next morning, the headline broke. Exclusive. Former Brightstone employee comes forward, exposes internal corruption. Lisa Montgomery had published everything. The fraudulent contracts, the altered lease agreements, the emails proving Brightstone's manipulation. It spread fast. Then came the biggest blow. The stock market reacted. Brightstone's shares plummeted. Investors panicked. The company's carefully maintained facade of legitimacy was crumbling in real time. At the courthouse, reporters swarmed Emma as she arrived. Emma, how do you feel about the new testimony? Do you think Brightstone will settle? Are you afraid for your safety? She held her head high, refusing to let them see her shaken. This case was never just about me, she said firmly. It's about every person Brightstone has exploited, and I won't stop fighting until we get justice. At Brightstone's headquarters, Richard Calloway was livid. The CEO slammed his fist onto the conference table, making the glasses rattle. Victoria Hale sat across from him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. This is getting out of control, Calloway snapped. The stock is tanking, the press is circling like vultures, and now we've got a damn whistleblower? Victoria leaned back. We have one move left. Calloway's jaw tightened. I'm listening. She exhaled. We settle. Calloway's nostrils flared. You want me to pay her off? If we don't, Victoria said coolly, this trial drags on. The longer it stays in the public eye, the worse it gets for us. A settlement keeps us out of court and silences her for good. Calloway stared at her for a long moment, then finally nodded. Fine. Offer her whatever it takes. Emma and Daniel were in the middle of preparing their next move when Daniel's phone rang. He listened for a few moments, then hung up, turning to Emma. Well, she asked. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. They want to settle. Emma blinked. They're offering you a blank check, Daniel continued. They'll pay whatever you want. But there's one condition. Emma already knew. They want me to stay silent. Daniel nodded. If you take it, you'll never be able to speak about this again. No press, no public statements, no warning others. Emma looked down, her mind racing. This was the moment, the easy way out. Take the money, walk away, rebuild her life, or, she lifted her head, meeting Daniel's gaze. We're not done, she said. Daniel nodded slowly. Then let's finish this. Emma stared at her phone, the screen glowing with an incoming call. The name displayed sent a chill down her spine. Richard Calloway, the CEO of Brightstone Realty, was reaching out to her directly. She let it ring twice before pressing accept. Miss Carter, his voice was smooth, calculated. I believe it's time we had a real conversation. Emma exhaled. We're already talking in court, Mr. Calloway. A soft chuckle came from the other end. Let's not pretend this needs to go any further. You've had your moment in the spotlight, but now it's time to think about your future. Emma clenched her jaw. What do you want? Calloway didn't hesitate. I'm prepared to make you an offer, a real offer, one that would put an end to all this. Right now. There was a pause before he continued. You name the price, and we'll make this all go away. Emma felt the weight of his words settle over her like a suffocating fog. We'll clear your name, Calloway went on, his voice soothing, persuasive. Your reputation will be restored, the lawsuits will disappear, and you'll be able to move on from all this unpleasantness. No more court dates, no more reporters hounding you. Just a clean slate. Her fingers curled tightly around the phone. How much, Anna? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You tell me, Calloway responded smoothly. If the number is right, we can settle this today. Emma's stomach twisted. This was it. The way out. She could take the money and walk away. No more threats, no more courtrooms, no more sleepless nights wondering if Brightstone would go even further to silence her. But she already knew the cost. Why now? She asked. Calloway hesitated for just a second before responding. Because I don't think you truly understand what's at stake. You're young, Miss Carter. Do you really want to spend the next few years of your life tangled in litigation? The public forgets. But the legal system? It never does. Emma swallowed hard. I need time to think, she finally said. You have 24 hours, Calloway replied. Then just before hanging up, he added, make the smart choice. At Daniel's office, she replayed the conversation out loud. When she finished, Daniel shook his head, his expression dark. You're not actually considering it. Emma didn't answer right away. Daniel leaned forward, his voice sharp. If you take the money, Brightstone wins. They'll keep doing this to other people, and you'll never be able to speak out. They'll bury this. Megan shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Emma, I get what Daniel is saying, but this is dangerous. They already broke into your apartment. They're willing to do anything to stop you. Emma looked down, fingers tapping against the armrest. What if this is the only way to come out of this alive? Daniel exhaled. Then let me ask you something. If you take the deal, what happens to the other victims? Emma froze. She had fought this long and this hard, not just for herself, but for every person Brightstone had cheated, intimidated, and silenced. If she took the money, what happened to them? She looked up at Daniel. They lose everything, he said simply. Emma let out a slow breath. Her decision was made. She picked up her phone, dialed Calloway's number, and waited. When he answered, she didn't let him speak first. No deal, she said. There was a long pause. Calloway's voice dropped to something colder, sharper. You just made the worst mistake of your life. Then the line went dead. The next day, Brightstone struck back. Victoria Hale filed a countersuit against Emma, accusing her of defamation. They demanded millions in damages, claiming her allegations had irreparably harmed their reputation. The media latched onto it instantly. Brightstone Realty fights back, countersues tenant for false accusations. Did Emma Carter lie? New lawsuit raises questions about her claims. Reporters swarmed outside Daniel's office, demanding a statement. Emma sat in the conference room, staring at the legal papers in front of her. Megan ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident in every movement. They're trying to crush you. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. It's not just about winning anymore. It's about survival. Daniel placed a hand on the table, voice firm. Then we fight harder. We take this all the way. Emma lifted her chin, determination flickering back into her eyes. If they want a war, she said, we'll give them a war. The morning of the trial arrived like a storm waiting to break. The courthouse was swarming with reporters, cameras flashing as Emma stepped out of the car. The air was thick with anticipation. The country was watching. Every major news outlet had picked up the case. Brightstone Realty, once a respected name in the real estate market, was now under nationwide scrutiny. But Emma knew this wasn't just about corporate fraud. It was about power, control, and the people they had crushed along the way. She took a deep breath. Today, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for all of them. Inside the courtroom, the tension was suffocating. Richard Callaway was present. The CEO of Brightstone Realty sat at the defense table, his presence alone commanding attention. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his expression unreadable. But Emma could see it, the stiffness in his posture, the tension in his jaw. He wasn't as confident as he wanted people to believe. Daniel leaned toward her. He wouldn't be here unless he was worried. Emma nodded, gripping her notes tightly. Then let's give him a reason to be. The judge entered. The bailiff called the court to order, and just like that, the final battle began. Victoria Hale took the floor first. She moved with the ease of a seasoned fighter, her voice smooth, her confidence unwavering. Your Honor, what we have here is a sensationalized attack against my client, a company that has operated with integrity for decades. Ms. Carter's claims are not just baseless, they are dangerous. She has used the media to stir up public outrage, and now she expects this court to validate her personal vendetta. Emma's fingers dug into her chair, but she didn't react. That was what Hale wanted, to get under her skin. Hale continued, pacing slowly. My client, Richard Callaway, is a respected businessman. He has built an empire that has provided homes for thousands. And yet today, he is being portrayed as a villain simply because one woman didn't read her lease carefully. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Daniel stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced precision. Your Honor, the defense would have you believe this case is about one person, but it's not. He turned, gesturing toward the gallery. This is about all of them. A ripple of movement. Former Brightstone tenants sat in the audience, their faces tense, their stories waiting to be heard. Emma glanced back at them, feeling a wave of strength surge through her. Daniel walked toward the jury. The defense claims Miss Carter is trying to manipulate the system, but let's look at the facts. He clicked a remote, and a slide appeared on the courtroom screen. An email chain, one that Brightstone never wanted the public to see. It was between Brightstone's senior executives discussing how to quietly alter lease agreements after tenants signed them. Daniel's voice was steady. These aren't just mistakes. These are deliberate changes designed to ensure tenants lost their security deposits with no way to fight back. He turned back to the jury. And this wasn't just one case. This was their business model. The prosecution began calling witnesses. Ryan Sterling took the stand, his voice unwavering as he exposed the fraudulent practices he had witnessed inside Brightstone. They told us not to worry if a tenant complained, Ryan testified. They knew most people couldn't afford to fight back. One by one, other victims spoke out. A mother who had lost her entire savings trying to rent a home that never existed. An elderly veteran who had been promised a senior-friendly lease, only to be locked into an impossible payment plan. And then, Emma took the stand. She met Victoria Hale's gaze across the room. Miss Carter, Hale began, would you say you understood every line of the contract you signed? Emma held her ground. I read it, but the contract I signed wasn't the contract Brightstone used against me. Hale smirked. And you expect the court to believe that? Emma turned to the jury, her voice unwavering. I don't expect you to take my word for it. I expect you to look at the proof. Daniel stood. And speaking of proof, we have one final piece of evidence. The moment everything changed was when Daniel played the recording. The entire courtroom fell silent as Richard Callaway's voice filled the room. It's just business. They sign, we take the money. If they fight back, we bury them. The words hung in the air like a bombshell. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The judge's expression hardened. The jury exchanged stunned glances. And Richard Callaway, his face turned pale. Victoria Hale jumped to her feet. Your Honor, this recording is... The judge held up a hand. Counselor, sit down. Callaway's hands clenched into fists. He knew it was over. As the judge ordered a recess, Emma and Daniel walked out into the hallway. The energy was electric, reporters swarming, cameras flashing, people cheering. Megan ran up, breathless. Emma, that recording, where did it come from? Daniel smirked. Let's just say Brightstone isn't as loyal to its CEO as he thought. Inside the courtroom, Calloway sat motionless, his empire crumbling around him. He was afraid. Emma turned back, locking eyes with him through the crowd. Her voice was quiet but firm. You tried to bury me, she said, but you forgot. I'm not afraid of the dark. The morning after the recording leak, Brightstone Realty was in freefall. Emma scrolled through the headlines. Brightstone's CEO exposed in leaked recording, admits to fraudulent practices. Stock plummets as investors flee. Is this the end of Brightstone Realty? Legal experts say Calloway could face criminal charges. She exhaled. They were winning, but she knew it wasn't over yet. Inside Brightstone's headquarters, chaos reigned. Richard Calloway stood at the head of the conference table, his fists pressed into the wood. Around him, executives whispered, their faces drawn and pale. The company's stock had lost nearly 40% of its value overnight. We need to contain this, Calloway growled. Victoria Hale, arms crossed, voice clipped, responded, there is no containing this. The SEC is opening an investigation. The Attorney General's office is watching, and let's not forget the dozens of lawsuits piling up. Calloway's jaw tightened. So what do you suggest? A long silence. Finally, one of the senior legal advisors cleared his throat. We settle. Calloway scoffed. You want me to pay her off? If we don't, Victoria said coldly, this case sets a precedent, and if that happens, every tenant we've ever screwed over will come out of the woodwork. Calloway clenched his teeth. He hated the idea, but he could see it now. Class action lawsuits, government investigations, the company unraveling thread by thread. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Fine, he muttered. Make the offer. The offer came that afternoon. Emma and Daniel sat in his office when the email arrived. Daniel read it aloud. Brightstone Realty proposes a full financial settlement for all affected tenants, in addition to a direct payout to Miss Carter in the amount of $5 million. Megan, who had been pacing by the window, froze mid-step. $5 million? Emma's stomach twisted. This is their way out, Daniel said, scanning the document. They pay, but they don't admit guilt. They walk away, and the case is dismissed. Emma's heart pounded. The number was staggering, life-changing. She could finally breathe, start fresh, rebuild her future. But then she looked up at Daniel, whose expression was unreadable. If I take it, she said, her voice quiet, what happens to them? She didn't need to explain who she meant. Daniel leaned back, hands clasped together. The case is closed. No trial, no precedent. Other victims? They'd have to fight this battle all over again, without you leading the charge. Emma exhaled. Megan's voice was soft. Emma, you've already done so much. No one would blame you for taking this and moving on. Emma swallowed hard. The weight of every person who had suffered at Brightstone's hands pressed against her chest. She thought about the single mothers who had lost their savings, the elderly tenants forced out of their homes, the young renters like herself who had trusted a system that had failed them. And then she knew. She stood. I need some air. Daniel watched her carefully. Emma. She met his gaze. I just need a moment. Emma walked through the city, feeling the pull in both directions. She passed a coffee shop and spotted a young woman inside, hunched over a rental agreement, a hopeful look in her eyes. She kept walking, but her mind stayed behind. This wasn't just about her anymore. She took a deep breath, turned around, and headed back to Daniel's office. The next morning, Emma walked into court with her answer. Richard Calloway was already there, seated beside Victoria Hale. He looked confident, smug, as if he already knew what she was going to say. Emma stood before the judge. The courtroom was silent, waiting. She took a breath. I don't want your money, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Calloway's smirk faded. I want justice. A murmur ran through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked. Calloway's fingers curled into fists. Emma turned to the judge. I decline the settlement. I want this case to go to verdict. The judge nodded. Understood. Victoria Hale sighed, rubbing her forehead. Calloway, on the other hand, looked murderous. He had no control. The judge adjusted his glasses. The court will reconvene in 48 hours for final arguments and a ruling. Emma turned to Calloway, her expression steady. She had just sealed his fate. The courthouse was overflowing. Reporters lined the halls, their cameras poised, waiting for the final decision. Inside the packed courtroom, every seat was filled. Former tenants of Brightstone, activists, attorneys, and those who had been following the case from the very beginning. Emma sat between Daniel and Megan, hands clasped in her lap. The weight of everything rested on this moment. Across the room, Richard Calloway sat stone-faced, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the defense table. Victoria Hale was beside him, her usual confidence replaced with tight-lipped silence. The judge entered. The bailiff called the court to order. Emma held her breath. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the courtroom before beginning. This court has reviewed the evidence, heard witness testimony, and considered the arguments from both the plaintiff and the defense. He paused, flipping through the written decision in front of him. The facts of this case are clear. The defendant, Brightstone Realty, engaged in deceptive business practices, including fraudulent contract alterations, misrepresentation of lease terms, and deliberate financial harm to tenants. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Emma's heart pounded. The court finds Brightstone Realty guilty of fraudulent business practices and contract manipulation. As a result, the company is ordered to pay $35 million in damages to affected tenants. Gasps filled the room. Reporters scrambled to type their notes. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, based on the evidence provided, this case has exposed criminal activity within the leadership of Brightstone Realty. Emma felt the shift in the room. The judge turned toward Richard Calloway. As CEO, Mr. Calloway knowingly authorized illegal contract modifications and fraudulent financial practices. Due to the severity of these actions, the court is referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The room exploded. Reporters yelled out questions. The gallery buzzed with stunned excitement. Calloway's face went pale, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. Order! The judge's gavel slammed down, restoring silence. Emma felt a wave of emotion crash over her. They had won. Brightstone wasn't just paying fines. Calloway was facing prison. Emma exhaled sharply, her hands trembling. Daniel turned to her, a rare, proud smile breaking across his face. You didn't just win this case, he murmured. You changed the system. She blinked rapidly, emotions overwhelming her. I don't even know what to say. He smirked. That's a first. Megan threw her arms around Emma, whispering, I knew you could do it. Emma let out a breathy laugh, hugging her back. I wasn't sure I could. But you did. On the other side of the courtroom, Calloway sat stiffly, his hands clenched. He turned to Victoria Hale, his voice low and furious. Do something. But Hale had nothing to say. Her lips pressed together, she simply stood, gathered her papers, and walked out of the courtroom without a word. Calloway watched her go, realization finally sinking in. There was no saving this. No more deals. No more cover-ups. He had lost. The courthouse steps were chaos. As soon as Emma emerged, microphones and cameras surrounded her. Reporters shouted questions, flashing lights making it almost impossible to see. Daniel stepped forward, shielding her slightly. A journalist from the New York Times managed to get a question through. Miss Carter, how do you feel knowing you've just taken down a corporate giant? Emma paused, the reality of it all settling in. She thought about the past few months, the fear, the doubt, the moments she almost walked away. And then she thought about every tenant who had been silenced, every family who had been cheated, and every person who had been told they were too small to fight back. She met the journalist's gaze and simply said, No one is too small to fight back. Cameras flashed. The fight was over. But a new journey was just beginning. Brightstone Realty was no more. Within days of the verdict, the once powerful real estate empire collapsed under its own weight. Investors fled, assets were frozen, and lawsuits piled up faster than the company's legal team could handle. A formal bankruptcy filing came shortly after, confirming what everyone already knew. Brightstone couldn't survive the financial devastation. The company that had spent years profiting from deception was now penniless, unable to pay its mounting debts. Emma watched the news coverage, taking in the images of Brightstone's headquarters with for sale signs posted out front. It was over. Richard Calloway was let out of his penthouse in handcuffs, flanked by federal agents. The charges against him were severe: fraud, contract manipulation, and obstruction of justice. Prosecutors were already working on a criminal case that could put him behind bars for years. At his arraignment, he stood before the judge, his once powerful swagger gone. The same reporters who had once scrambled for his sound bites now hurled questions at him as he was escorted into a police vehicle. "Mr. Calloway, do you have anything to say about the charges?" Calloway's jaw tightened. He refused to answer. But the damage had been done. His name was synonymous with corruption, his career finished, his legacy ruined, and no amount of money could save him now. Victoria Hale tried to distance herself from the scandal. She resigned from Brightstone's legal team immediately, hoping to salvage what was left of her career. But it was too late. An ethics investigation was launched into her role in the case. Her law license was under review, and legal analysts speculated that she might face disciplinary action, or worse, disbarment. She had been one of the most feared attorneys in corporate law. Now, she was just another fallen figure in Brightstone's downfall. The case sent shockwaves through the real estate world. Legislators rushed to propose new tenant protection laws, inspired by the corrupt practices exposed during the trial. Other real estate firms, sensing the public scrutiny, scrambled to clean up their own business practices, fearful of becoming the next Brightstone. Investigative reporters dug deeper, uncovering more companies engaging in similar schemes. It was no longer just about Emma's fight. It was about real change, and it was happening. In the days following the verdict, Emma Carter's name was everywhere. News outlets called her the tenant warrior, the woman who had taken on a corporate giant and won. She received job offers from major firms, organizations, and even government agencies, but she turned them all down. Instead, she joined a nonprofit focused on tenant rights, determined to use her experience to help others navigate a system that had nearly destroyed her. "This isn't about me," she said in an interview. "This is about making sure no one else goes through what I did." Megan sat across from Emma at their favorite coffee shop, a quiet smile on her face. "I still can't believe you turned down all those offers," she said, stirring her drink. Emma laughed, shaking her head. "You sound like my mom." Megan smirked. "I just think it's funny. You could be making six figures in some cushy corporate office, and instead, you're still out here fighting." Emma took a sip of her coffee, thinking. "Yeah," she said, "I guess I am." Megan grinned. "You're insane." Emma laughed, the kind of real, unburdened laugh she hadn't felt in months. "Probably." Megan's expression softened. "I'm proud of you, Em." Emma looked down, then back up at her friend. "Thanks, Meg." They had been through a lot: disagreements, fear, even doubts. But in the end, their friendship had survived. Daniel and Emma stood outside the courthouse, watching as the last reporters packed up their cameras. There was no trial looming over them, no Brightstone threats hanging in the air. It was done. Daniel slipped his hands into his pockets. "So, what's next?" Emma exhaled, the cool breeze ruffling her hair. "I keep fighting," she said simply. Daniel smiled. "Then I guess we're not done working together." She looked at him, surprised. "You want to keep doing this?" He nodded. "Turns out you're a pretty decent client." Emma chuckled. "High praise." Daniel smirked. "Don't let it go to your head." She shook her head, but inside she knew. This wasn't just about one case anymore. This was what she was meant to do. And Daniel, he'd be right there with her. Emma sat across from a high-profile journalist, a microphone clipped to her blouse. The interview had covered everything: the case, the trial, the fallout. Then came the final question. "If you had to do it all over again," the interviewer asked, "would you?" Emma thought for a moment. She thought about the fear, the losses, the nights she wanted to quit. She thought about the people she had helped, the voices she had amplified, the system she had forced to change. And then she smiled. Absolutely. 1 year had passed. The world had changed. Tenant protection laws had been strengthened. closing the loopholes that companies like Brightstone had exploited for years. The legal system had become more vigilant, with stricter regulations on rental agreements and contract transparency. The victory in Emma's case had set a precedent, making it harder for landlords and corporations to manipulate renters. Across the country, new policies were enacted, ensuring that no one else would have to go through what she did. And Brightstone, gone, dismantled, erased. Its former CEO, Richard Calloway, was in the middle of a lengthy criminal trial, facing charges that could keep him behind bars for decades. Emma read the headlines every now and then, but she had moved forward. She had bigger things to do. Emma stood on a stage, the auditorium packed with lawyers, activists, and community leaders. She adjusted the microphone, looking out at hundreds of faces, people eager to hear her story, to learn how one woman had challenged the system and won. It still felt surreal. 1 year ago, she had been a scared tenant fighting for her security deposit. Now, she was being invited to conferences, consulting on new tenant laws, and helping others navigate a system she had once feared. She took a deep breath. "The day I walked into court," she began, "they told me I was too young, too inexperienced to understand the law." A quiet murmur ran through the crowd. She smiled. "I wasn't too young. They were just too arrogant to see it." Applause erupted. But Emma barely heard it. She wasn't here for applause. She was here to make sure no one else felt as powerless as she once did. After the event, Emma was packing up when a woman approached her. She was older, maybe in her 60s, her hands clasped in front of her. There was something familiar about her, a quiet strength in her eyes. "I just wanted to say," the woman said, her voice soft but steady, "because of you, I didn't sign a contract with a company like Brightstone." Emma blinked, caught off guard. The woman smiled. "You saved me before I even knew I needed saving." Emma's chest tightened. All the months of fighting, the nights spent doubting herself, the times she had wondered if it was all worth it. This moment answered all of it. It had never just been about her own battle. It had always been about something bigger. She reached out, squeezing the woman's hand. "I'm glad," she said. "Really, I am." The woman nodded and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Emma stood there for a moment, feeling something she hadn't before. Not just relief, not just justice, purpose. That evening, Emma stood on the rooftop of a downtown building, looking out over the city. The skyline was the same, the streets still bustling, but she knew this city had changed, and so had she. Megan texted her, "Dinner tonight? You deserve a break, warrior." Daniel had sent her a message earlier about another landlord trying to exploit tenants, a case they might take on together. She exhaled, the cool air filling her lungs. 1 year ago, she had been forced into this fight. Now, she was choosing it, because the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. She smiled, tucking her phone into her pocket. Then she turned, walking away from the skyline, toward whatever was next. Before we close this story, let's take a moment to reflect. Emma's journey wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It was about proving that no one is too small to stand up for what's right. In a world where powerful corporations often silence those without influence, her story is a reminder that courage and persistence can bring real change. But here's the real question. How many other Brightstones are still out there? Emma's fight may be over, but the battle for fairness and justice continues. Have you ever faced an unfair system and felt powerless? What would you do differently now? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice, resilience, and personal transformation, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay strong, stay aware, and never be afraid to fight back.